Hey, college football fans. Welcome to another Pac-12 segment of the CFP podcast. I am Chappy, joined today by Josh Furlow. Now, Josh is the beat writer for Utah football and sports director of KSL.com. He's an award-winning journalist and the source to go to when you want to talk Utah football. And man, it seems like that's a hot button topic online this preseason. So Josh, thanks for taking time to chat, brother.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, by the way, if you're new to the show, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining. And I invite you to follow, chat, and even vent to me on Twitter. I'm at Chappy CFB, and you can follow our guest Josh at JFurKSL. That's JFURKSL. So, all right, Josh, in this series, I've started by talking about my experience and nostalgia with each guest's team. And for me, I loved watching Utah climb the CFB ladder in the WAC. I mean, the 94 season where they were neck and neck with Colorado State in the WAC, and they beat them, and then unfortunately stubbed their toe against New Mexico and Air Force, I think, in back-to-back weeks. But watching Luther Ellis, number 83, was fun to watch in Salt Lake City. And then he was even more enjoyable to watch for my hometown Detroit Lions. One of the few things that was entertaining about that, after the Barry Sanders days. But I also enjoyed watching Utah teams under Urban Meyer, Alex Smith, Eric Weddle. Then Kyle Whittingham comes in, and he has been awesome in not only continuing the legacy and tradition of Utah football, which is incredible because he was a BYU guy, but then taking them to the heights that they're at now where people are talking potential CFP. And I have to say that Britton Covey was my all-time favorite Ute, so he's certainly going to be missed. He and his 9 years in Salt Lake City, it seemed like. But enough about my nostalgia. Tell us about your past and how you got into doing what you do for Utah football, Josh.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because growing up, I actually didn't like college football. It was something that my dad had on more just to nap to.
Yeah,
he was he grew up in Iowa and Nebraska, so he loved those teams. Iowa was always his team, but he was never really a huge fan of it. I was always into like the NBA, NFL, that kind of stuff, so it was nice that way. But then when I got into my adult life, I really turned into a huge college football fan. I loved it. Everything about it was really entertaining. I love the aspects of it. And, when I got my first journalism job, I just happened to be put on the Utah beat as something to do. And I fell in love with the sport even more. So I don't have like this long standing history of being able to watch a lot of these games. I've definitely been able to keep up and do a lot of that stuff. But now I love it more, honestly, than the NBA. That was always my first love. And it's been fun to be able to watch it and see the change and kind of how my fandom has grown in terms of just all of college football. And it's helped to be able to have some good rivalries in the state. I think everybody thinks that because I cover Utah that I'm a Utah lover. I hate BYU and Utah State, but that's not true. I've always loved to be able to follow the local schools, and I want to see each team do well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And unfortunately, there's no Utah BYU matchup this year. But the potential of both schools being in the Big 12. I know that there's rumors out there that Utah is kind of being courted by that conference, and BYU will be joining that conference next year. So that will be good to see. And then I'm hoping that, they can continue to work in the beehive boot between those three schools and see that those three schools playing each other on a semi-regular basis would be great again. So remember, college football fans, I recently released my Pac-12 picks, projections, and peak performing players. So check out my website, cfpcollegefootball.com. So Josh, let's get into the veins of Utah football. Let's become the must. So first, I want to talk about Utah's success the last 3-5 years, really. So in the last 5 years, they've been the winningest Pac-12 team in terms of conference play. So they're 28-13 in the last 5 years, which is tops in the conference, 40-20 overall. Then you look at the last 3 years, Utah is 19-4 in the conference. Again, tops in the league, 24-9 overall. Last year was, one of their best seasons of recent date. I know the 13-0 season early in Whittingham's tenure was pretty good, but when you consider what Utah did last year, especially just absolutely stomping Oregon in Salt Lake City, and then beating them again in the Pac-12 championship game, coming this close to winning the Rose Bowl. It was awesome. And like we said earlier, people are picking Utah to make the college football playoff. Our friend Brett Ciancia at Pick Six Previews, my co-host Mike Waxman, they're saying top 4 or bust. So why should casual college football fans believe the hype that Utah is ready to make that jump and become just the second Pac-12 rep since Washington in 2017 to make the college football playoff this year, Josh?
Yeah, that's an interesting question to answer, right? Because I think there is a lot of hype for Utah right now, and I think a lot of people saw what they did in the Rose Bowl and saw that they went toe to toe with Ohio State, which many obviously see as a championship contending team, and so I think that kind of gives them that. The interesting thing to me is, it's one of those things where Kyle Whittingham has had consistency, and that's the thing that helps him the most, right?
Sure.
You can point to a lot of the different things that, why Utah shouldn't be able to be in this position, and a lot of those reasons are very valid and real. But the reason is Kyle Whittingham is consistent, and he understands what needs to happen. He's built a staff around him that really kind of works and helps complement all of the different things that he does. Now, are they perfect by any means? No. Do they have the recruiting base that, the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Alabamas, Clemsons, those teams have? No. But in the same vein, they've been able to consistently do what they need to in the Pac-12 to keep them relevant. Now, that it's tough. I think everybody comes in here and they look at USC with Lincoln Riley being hired in as somebody that's going to be the natural, we'll call it the thorn in Utah's side, we'll say. And that very well could be true, right? I'm curious to see how that works. They've obviously got a lot of skills players and a lot of different talent that, Utah has to run through. But I think Utah has the most consistent base. And I think that allows them to be able to be there. Now, will they be in the college football playoff? I don't know. 2019 was a good jumping off point for them. They were ranked, I believe it was 5 in that last week going into the Pac-12 championship game. And then they laid an egg and saw their college football playoffs dreams die. And I think that's the interesting thing is I think for the longest time, they've always been trying to prove themselves. They've always trying to say, okay, look, we joined a Power 5 conference, a decade ago. People still don't give us the respect that we deserve, yet they still think that they have that respect. And they do. But I think, you're never going to be able to be those blue bloods because you've been in it only for 10 years. And yeah, you had Urban Meyer, you had Kyle Whittingham's undefeated seasons, but those are blips on the radar. That's like Boise State, right?
Right.
Now they've been building towards that. They've been able to see it. Even fans here locally, they look at it and it was always like, we don't talk about, the Rose Bowl. We don't talk about championships. We don't talk about these things because they were so worried about actually losing it. Now they're starting to get to that point where, I don't, some would call it arrogancy. Some would call it, wishful thinking, whatever, fan base you want to decide on. But I think, they're starting to recognize success and they're starting to see what it takes to actually get there. So if there is a chance to get to the college football playoff this year could be that, but I still think there's so many challenges ahead of them, right? I think they have all the talent. They've got a phenomenal quarterback. They've got great depth at running back, which is their bread and butter. And they've got a defense that is always stout. So I think they have the making, right? Like I think that's there. For me personally, like I don't know if I'd put them quite there in the college football playoff spot yet, but I think that it is viable. I just don't know how viable it is until we actually see it happen.
Yeah, and from my limited exposure and experience with conversing with Utah fans, it seems like Utah fans are more cautiously optimistic than other people. I mean, the quote unquote casual college football fan will look at it and say, how could you put Utah this low? Or others will say, how could you put them this high? And it seems like a lot of Utah people are like, yeah, we've got the makings of things that could be really good, but we don't want to, we got to take it 1 week at a time, and we got to make sure that this happens and this happens. And of course, there's the whole thing about we got to stay healthy. We got to make sure that we have, some bounces go our way. And I mean, it's a great segue here you talk about Kyle Whittingham. And for me personally, I will take culture over recruiting any day. It's not even close. And he's built that. However, he's number 8 right now in active coaches among total wins. He's got 144. It's number 1 in the Pac-12. So he's got more wins in the Pac-12 than anybody else. And I know some people jump in and say, well, Lincoln Riley, if you go by winning percentage, Lincoln Riley has more in a shorter period of time, take that for what it's worth. But, Whittingham's got a Mountain West Conference title. He's got a Pac-12 title. He's been in 4 Pac-12 championship games, or 3 in the last 4 years. He's got 4 South Division titles. He's got 9 wins in 9 seasons, 9 wins or more. Yet still, people fail to talk about him when they talk about top 10 college football coaches. Why do you think that is? And why does Coach Whitt get overlooked?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is just simply, the nature of being in Utah, right? You're not on either coast, so you're not going to be able to get that love. And he's not really that flashy of a person. Like he loves to stay here. This is where he, lived most of his life. I mean, he grew up in LA in some points when his dad was coaching in the NFL. Yeah. But for the most part, Utah's it, right? And so for him, he's not the guy that's chasing all these big contracts and doing all that. And granted, he's getting paid handsomely at Utah. But I think a lot of people just don't recognize it because it's Utah, right? Like a lot of people don't think of Utah as this place where you can have a talented head coach that's going to last as a dynasty. Yeah, you've got, different coaches throughout college football that have been in these places that have done it, but Utah just doesn't seem like this place where that happens. But on that same side, I think you also have to win those big games, right? Like Kyle Whittingham going into 2019 was one of the most winningest all-time bowl game coaches. And then the last few years they've lost. They've laid some eggs. Obviously, Utah is still getting credit for that Rose Bowl loss. I think that what gave him some credibility, and especially since you didn't have any cornerbacks to really help, and you pulled over a running back to help that. What would that game be like if you had that? Now, granted, Jackson Smith-Njigba and CJ Stroud are just phenomenal anyway.
Right.
But I think he's got to get to that point where he's got to win these big games. Yeah, you had 13-0, but you were in the Mountain West Conference, and yeah, you beat Alabama. But like any team can surprise a team at any given time, right? So we get that. But I think with Kyle, he has to be able to eventually win those big games. And I think he's getting there. I think people are starting to recognize, like, okay, what you did to Oregon twice in the same season, and then what you did against Ohio State, that's great. You've beaten the Michigans with Jim Harbaugh his first season. You've beaten Nick Saban with Alabama. I think those are there, but I think he has to do it on a more consistent basis and not just do it beating up the Pac-12.
Sure. And based on all of that, like you said earlier, going back to the first question of conversation was, do you see them as a college football playoff type team? And you were a little bit hesitant, and I'm the same way. Like I see them absolutely at 10 wins, possibly higher. So I don't typically like to talk about things from a negative standpoint. So we're going to phrase it this way. What will Utah need to clean up, sharpen, or watch carefully if they're to avoid stumbling on their way to that spot among the finest four in college football?
Well, first off, you obviously have to be injury free, right? Well, within reason, right? I mean, people are going to get injured, but I think you have to be able to be good in the secondary. You have to be good in the secondary to be able to compete. And I think especially when you're going to go up against USC, which is going to have so many star talent at wide receiver, that's the key. You're going to be fine in the trenches. You're going to be good there. Utah is returning one of the top, offensive lines in the country. They're always good at the defensive line. Linebackers inexperienced, but nobody really doubts them. But I think if you really want to be successful and you want to compete with the big boys, you have to be stout in that secondary, which is tough, right? Like you do have, Clark Phillips, the second who's coming in there. That's really talented. He's expected to be, an NFL type player after this season. He's the guy that, Ohio State lost and went to Utah, which everybody points to as kind of a turning point for Utah to some extent. But so I think that's kind of where it is. And you obviously need phenomenal play from Cam Rising. So obviously quarterback play is what it is, but I don't want to necessarily handicap it on that. I think it definitely does come down to that secondary and being able to make sure that they can go toe to toe with teams.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at Utah's schedule here, they get USC in Rice-Eccles Stadium, where in that series, the home team is 7-2. So Utah doesn't travel well to the Coliseum. Conversely, USC doesn't travel well to Rice-Eccles. So that's a plus. What's the game that stands out to you on Utah's schedule that maybe you're the most concerned about? Not necessarily because they're the second most talented team on their schedule, but maybe it's just like where it falls or the fact that it's in this location or this kind of history has happened. Who do you look at and say, okay, I'm really hoping that Utah wins this game because I see this as a potential trap game?
Yeah, I think there's two games there that definitely that you can look to. One is Oregon, that they travel to Eugene and they have to play there. That's always a tough environment. And you have to imagine that those remaining Oregon Ducks players that are there, they remember, right? They're not going to forget those two games. Noah Sewell alone, that guy will kill somebody. I honestly, he hit so hard. But I think that's one of those environments is there. And then Arizona State, Arizona State. Now I understand this. Arizona State is not going to be very good this year, but I think Arizona State's always kind of been that thorn in Utah's side for whatever reason it is. They have a way of being able to just kind of confound Utah. Now, granted, the last few years Utah's done really well against them. But that's always one of those games that's kind of a tricky one. It is in Arizona, so it's one of those things that's different. So, for the most part, I don't necessarily see the schedule as being too difficult in the sense that, these are all winnable games for Utah. I think, it's pretty much the same schedule that Utah had last year, except you're replacing BYU with Florida. And, I don't want to gloss that one over because that one's a huge one. That's a first game of the season.
Right.
Florida has a phenomenal quarterback. They've got a new head coach. There's a lot of excitement there. You're in the swamp. I mean, that's a tough environment. So, ignoring that one, I think in Pac-12 play, Oregon is probably the number one game that I think is there, and then Arizona State is probably more of a trap game as a team that's just like, look, they're not going to be very good. We don't have to worry about them, but they somehow find a way to always just be the thorn in Utah's side.
Yeah, and I like that pick because it's the Pac-12 opener and it's the week after San Diego State, a team that Utah tripped up against last year. So that a lot of that Utah roster is like, okay, we are damn sure going to beat these Aztecs this year, especially when they're coming into our backyard. And there's that potential of the emotional expense in that week. And then you turn around the following Saturday, you've got to go out to Sun Devil Stadium in the Pac-12 opener when, Oregon State's after that. And people are thinking kind of highly of the Beavers in the North this year, or in what used to be the North. I know that now it's really just a scheduling format. And yeah, Oregon has only they've lost 10 games in the last 5 years. Only one has come at Autzen Stadium. So they are, whatever that number is, 30 something and one at home in the last 5 years. The game that stands out to me is off of a bye week, October 27th on a Thursday. So a short week at Pullman, Washington, where the Washington State Cougars are 31-10 in the last 7 years, which is number 26th nationally. And I know that people will look at the schedule, casual fans, and say, okay, well, it's Wazoo. This is really year 1.5 of a new coach. And they're still trying to find something. They got a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator who both sound pretty good. But that's a game for me that Utah really, really needs to be careful there because Martin Stadium has proven to be not the easiest place to travel and play and then get out alive as you're trying to get to that Pac-12 title game.
I absolutely agree. I think the two teams that you mentioned that kind of really, can trip Utah up is Oregon State and Washington State. Oregon State did that to Utah last year. It was just this weird fluke game that Utah had no way of coming in. You had blocked punts that were returned for touchdowns, everything. But we've seen it also in Washington State where Utah and Washington State have had these weird, bizarre games that it doesn't make sense. Yeah. And going up to Pullman, I believe it was 2019 that they were up in Pullman and they lost that game. Yeah. And I think it's one of those types of teams that for whatever reason, I don't know if Utah just says, okay, we're playing this lesser opponent, even though they've done better, I think maybe that just gets in their mind. I am curious with Washington State. You don't have Jaden Delore. Yeah, you have, like you said, the 1.5 season. That one will be interesting to me. I'm curious to see if it was more of a galvanizing moment last year where it was like, we're going to rally around our head coach. Jaden Delore was kind of the guy that was helping them. And what does that do this year? Are they that same team? Now, with that said, I still think they're kind of one of those sleeper picks in a lot of ways that could cause some disruption, and we'll still call it the North because it's easier to describe it that way. Right. So I don't know. I'm curious to see what that is. Are they better than Washington this year, and do they rival something that Utah can't combat? I don't know. I think I agree with you. I think it's always one of those types of games, though. Oregon State, Washington State, that is one of those that is always just considered the trap game. It's a tough opportunity, like you said, come off the bye week, come on a Thursday, and Pullman is in the middle of nowhere. It's hard to be able to get there, so it'll be interesting.
And on a Thursday night, what else are Wazoo students going to do or going to want to do other than attend this primetime Pac-12 game with most likely a top 10, maybe top 5 Utah team, probably undefeated at that point, coming high off of a what I'm calling a victory over USC a couple weeks prior. And it's like, okay, everybody show up in droves and bring Old Crimson there, and we'll wave it around and we'll see if they can escape the Pullman mystique. So talking about personnel now, Josh, who's a player, or maybe two if you have a couple in mind, that we can expect to make a jump this year and have an impact season, even though maybe they're not getting any all conference talk right now? Who are the guys maybe beneath the surface, or one guy who you're like, okay, they had a good spring, they kind of ended last season kind of hot, but they're not getting a lot of love. Keep an eye out for this person.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I'm trying to think of a number of players that would be in that scenario. I'm going to stick with, let's see, where is it? Linebacker Kareni Reed. He's a guy that it's not going to really get a lot of love. He's not somebody that is going to come out there and immediately show up and say, okay, this is the guy, right? But I think he did exactly what he needed to at the linebacker position to be able to be relevant, be consistent, be a good backup. Now, with that linebacker core essentially gutted after last year, I'm curious to see where he fits in. I think he's making necessary steps to get there. I think he's one of those guys that can be there. Now, with that being said, I understand that there's some other guy like Lander Barton. He's a freshman that is just an incredible talent, and he's probably going to get us, the starting role. You also have Muhammad Diabate coming from Florida, who should absolutely dominate there. So I'm curious to see where he fits into that. But he's one of those guys that is there that is going to get some love. Otherwise, I also would point to Travis Broughton, JT Broughton. He's a cornerback. He was starting to get some, tremendous love. He was starting to do some really good things, but nobody's really seen much from him because he got injured. He would be a phenomenal complement to Clark Phillips on the other side at corner, allow him to be able to do that. You also have Malone Matayele, who's a nickelback, hybrid role situation right there. I think those are the type of players that I think are going to surprise people that maybe don't get a lot of that love. Clark Phillips is stolen all the love because he's that high recruit. He's the guy that's done it. JT Broughton, Malone Matayele, Karene Reed, those types of players, I think those are the glue that kind of fit it together. Those aren't necessarily maybe some of the stars. Maybe JT Broughton can be that level. But I think those are kind of those guys that I think can have that impact moving forward.
Yeah, and that seems to be the epitome of a Kyle Whittingham, Morgan Scalley defense, is more than just the headliners. It's like you said, all that glue that kind of, and again, going back to the idea of building a culture, it's not hey, we've got 3 or 4 5-star guys that we're putting out on this defense. It's everybody's got a role, everybody's got to contribute. And it's not just the top 11, it's guys, in depth as well. So, I mean, you talked about Lander Barton, and I've heard some talk of other newcomers this year who have stepped on campus or maybe have had workouts and really impressed the coaches and their new teammates and the media like you that's close. So aside from Barton, which other youngsters do you expect to log some serious snaps and maybe start to etch their way into the Utah universe this season?
I think that's definitely Jalen Glover. I think he's he's a running back from Florida. He's a guy that, I hesitate to say this because Tavion Thomas was so dominant last year when he played. I mean, he had some issues with fumbling, and so that kind of kept him out at times. But I hesitate to say that, a Jalen Glover can come in there and just dominate and win that job. But I think if there's anybody that can have an immediate impact as a freshman, it's probably him. I think he's got the, he's built like nobody's business for a freshman. I mean, like you're watching some of these kids come in and you're like, there's no way you should be built like that. But he comes in, he's got a great head on his shoulders where he's got a great IQ. He's smart. He carries himself in a way that feels like more of a veteran. And I don't want to overshoot the fact that he's a freshman, and it's going to take time to get there, right? Your first game against Florida is going to be a huge jump. I mean, that's your hometown. You're going to come in there and you're going to be able to see some craziness. But I think, if he can manage, Florida and then the next 2 games with San Diego State and Southern Utah is not really the issue there. But I think if he can manage that and get in there, I really think that he's going to, rival at least Tavion Thomas in terms of the carries. And I think he has a good shot to be able to do that. He's built, he hits hard, he comes in there, he attacks the gaps really well, and he's able to break away. He's got great speed. So that's one of those guys that, outside of Lander Barton on the defense, on the offense, I think it's definitely him. I think he's the guy that, fans are going to look to as, okay, this is the freshman that's going to get a lot of play.
Yeah. And I mean, for him to get that consideration and to be, looked at as possibly the number 2 in a room that also contains Mekhi Bernard and Chris Curry, a big physical back transfer from LSU a couple seasons ago. I mean, that's saying something. I'm hearing a lot about Justin Medlock on the defensive side as well. Is he somebody else who's kind of emerged? Because I'm hearing Barton and Medlock as 2 guys that, we could hear a lot about on this defense, especially maybe by season's end if talent or even injury necessitates their rise.
Yeah, I think Lander was definitely the guy that everybody was expecting, right? I think everybody expected him to do it. He's got an older brother in the NFL. He's got the make. He's seemingly better. But Justin Medlock, every time we'd talk to Kyle Whittingham, he would always be thrown in there. And Kyle doesn't just throw names in there to throw names in there. He's one of those guys that he's very calculated in how he does that. And so with Lander and Justin Medlock getting linked together, that we can't see it necessarily to some extent because we don't see those practices, but the fact that he's linking those 2 together says something, because I think I don't want to say he was an under recruited talent, but I think he wasn't getting the love that a lot of people expected Justin Medlock to get. And so the fact that he's able to rival, a 4-star guy, a guy that is able to be able to do those things, I think that goes a long way. And I think Justin is going to be a phenomenal talent for him as well.
Excellent. Excellent. And this is all great, like, between the tea leaves, the minutia that we want here on the CFP podcast. So couple questions real quick about the Pac-12 as you see it. So I'm going to give you my top four in the conference. And for those, again, who are unaware, the Pac-12 championship this year is not going to be split into North and South. It's going to be the top two teams in terms of win percentage within the conference first, and then head to head. And, they've got their pecking order. So I see it, and don't get mad at me, Utah fans, but I see Oregon and USC as the top two. I have Utah beating USC, but I do have the Utes slipping up in Pullman and then losing at Oregon, giving them two Pac-12 losses. And I see the Utah game really being the only loss for USC. So by virtue of how their schedule sets up, I see those two. But then I've got Utah 3 and I've got UCLA 4. So how do you see who do you look at as the top four teams in this conference vying for Vegas on December 2nd, as it appears to you right now, Josh?
I would think those four teams are the ones that I would see. I think UCLA, in my opinion, is maybe the next tier of those four. I see it those three. My question really comes down to Oregon and in Bo Nix, right? I think he's the expected starter. He's obviously had experience with Auburn and different talent that way, but he hasn't been consistent. He hasn't shown enough that I don't know if he's going to do it well at Oregon. Obviously, Dan Lanning is a different guy, and maybe he can get something out of him. Yeah. And so that's what gives me pause with Oregon. I don't really know. And so that's where I kind of have problem so for that reason, I would probably go with Utah and USC in the championship game. I think it's a really safe pick, right? I think, that doesn't, you're not going to lose a lot of sleep over that one.
Right.
But when you said USC and Oregon, I 100% see it. I think that's a viable solution that could work. And I think that's something that, USC has a very favorable schedule that I think, for them to make a mistake, it's going to be far less difficult, if that makes sense, right? Like Utah's schedule isn't necessarily that difficult. It is, but it's not as difficult it is a little bit more difficult than USC's. And I think USC has all of the ability to be able to run that table. Now, I don't think they're going to go unscathed. I think they'll lose a game or two, but I definitely think that the USC has that best chance. And so, Oregon, whatever Oregon does, I think that's fine. I think Utah is looking more at USC, and if they can beat USC, I think that gives them the best chance. Now, like you said, you lose a game to Washington State or Oregon State or one of these other schools, you can almost kiss it goodbye, especially with how it's structured. So, I'll go with Utah USC right now, but I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. And of course, this is going on Twitter, so it's gospel right now. And you are either 100% right or 100% wrong, and you're an idiot, right? So, and most of Twitter, we're all idiots anyway. So, so what about a team that you think could exceed expectations and maybe be more of a player in the conference cat scratch than many might see right now? Is there a team that jumps out to you that you're like, well, I'm not hearing a lot about this team, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them in that top four come November?
When you said it, I wasn't thinking necessarily top four, but I can go with that. Washington State could be one of those teams if they can build off of that. Maybe Washington. I don't know. I'm still curious to see what happens with Washington. So I'm not ready to concede that. But when you said that, I was really interested in Arizona. Now that sounds like a funny pick because Arizona has been garbage, right? Let's be real. I mean, they've hired terribly. They haven't recruited well. And I think ultimately the recruiting is going to hurt them, and it's going to take them a few years to get there. But I think what Jed Fish has there, he's doing well. And I'm not expecting them to be in the top four, but I could definitely see Arizona being in the middle of the conference and being able to compete at a better level than ever before. Like you said, Twitter type stuff. I put out there that I think Arizona's going to finish above Arizona State this year. I think that's,
and I'm right there with you, honestly.
I don't know. I think they're good, right? Like I think they have the talent. I think they've understood what's going on. Nobody believes in them, so they're going to those games that's just going to be stupid, but it's fun. So I don't know.
Yeah, and again, CFPcollegefootball.com. I picked Arizona as my team to exceed expectations. I have them going 4-8 in on the year this year, and all 4 wins in conference, which would put them at 4-5. And one thing that Jed Fish and his staff have done really well is they've really hit the transfer portal. So last year and then this previous cycle as well. I mean, getting guys like Jade Delora, Jacob Cowing from UTEP, Anthony Solomon from Michigan on the defensive side, Hunter Eccles from USC. I mean, those are just a couple of guys. And, when on one of our recent Pac-12 podcasts, when we were talking about the Pac-12, that was a team that I wanted to throw out there because I'm not calling for Arizona to be an 8-win team this year, but if they make it to a bowl, or if they get to 7, maybe even 8 wins by virtue of things bouncing the right way, I would not be overly surprised because of what they've done the last 2 years. I think Jed Fish has made the most traction with the least amount and what he started with than maybe any coach in the Pac-12 on the staff right now, at least within the last few years.
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of opportunities for him. So I think it'll be exciting to watch Arizona and see what they can do.
Yeah, I right there with you, and I'm glad you brought that up. So one last question, and then we'll wrap it up here, Josh. But on the other side, is there a team that you think might be overrated, where expectations and plates of pressure are heavier than what they're ready to bench at this time, to use that weightlifting analogy?
I think the easy pick there is USC. I think it's easy to sit there and say that Lincoln Riley's going to come in, everything's going to gel, everything's going to work well. I hesitate with that one though, because I think Lincoln Riley is a proven talent. He understands his rosters really well. He's able to maximize it. He's obviously got a quarterback that he knows very well. And I mean, it's real easy when you've got all these guys, Jordan Addison, for one example, that comes in, he knows a thing or two about playing football. Sure. I think, there is potential to crash and burn there, but at the same time, I think they're good. Outside of that, I don't know if there's anybody that really is getting a lot of hype that could do it. Maybe it's Utah, right? I think maybe, right. Utah could come in there and maybe it was the death of their 2 teammates that really galvanized them and helped them and really helped them. Now, I don't think it's fully that. I think, that they have the talent and they can do it, but maybe they're that team, right? Where they only get 8 or 9 wins and something happens where now that you're the hunted and then instead of the hunter, and it's easy to lose a lot of those games. So for me, I think, Utah, USC, Oregon, even to that extent where, Bo Nix could just be a horrible fell and, your backups don't really do anything. Right. Any 3 of those I think could be it. But other than that, I don't know if there's anybody that's really overhyped. Maybe UCLA, Chip Kelly hasn't really done anything with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So right. I don't know, that is a tough question. And I'm going to have to give that one some thought. I have to admit, I think there is definitely a lot of hype for USC. So I think it's easier for them to fail just from how much hype there is. Yeah. But any 3 of those teams, I think, could easily be in that category.
Yeah. And, so when I look at that, I kind of look at the common projections of win totals. And so Oregon State, like I said earlier, is a team that some people are wanting to peg as like, okay, they could be the sleeper in the Pac-12, and they could be. But they start off with Boise State at home. Then they got to travel to Fresno on back-to-back weeks. They've got Montana State, which is an FCS team that, you really shouldn't overlook. Then they've got to play USC at home and Utah on the road. So their first 5 games are extremely tough. They've got to travel to Washington. Seattle's a tough place to play. Stanford is a team who I think is probably going to be a little bit better than many people expect this year. And they've got to play them, on the farm. So, while I have Oregon State going 8-4 this year, I only have them at 5-4 in the conference. And again, there's a couple of those wins that I project as wins that could easily go the other side. And we could see not an 8-4 team, but maybe a 6-6 team, maybe even a 5-7 team. And people are saying, what the heck happened to Oregon State? I thought Jonathan Smith had this team going in the right direction. So that's kind of my pick.
I think that's fair, because I think, like you said, looking at the win totals, projections and all that, I think that makes sense. Maybe it's an Arizona State as well, right? I think people, for whatever reason, still have them winning a lot of games. Yeah. I just don't see it. Maybe they do. Maybe Herm Edwards figures out a way, but I don't see it. So yeah, if you're going that route, 100%, I agree with you. Sure. I think, Oregon State, Arizona State, Washington State, those types of teams, I think those might be overrated that way.
Yeah. We're on the same page, man. So, all right, Josh, that was great, man. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is your precision and depth of knowledge on not only Utah football, but the Pac-12 conference and the schedule that's laid out in front of them every year. And when we talk, we're just talking football like we're old college buddies that get together frequently. And this is what we talk about. So thanks for helping us have a great time and a great show, Josh.
Yeah, anytime. I'm happy to do it. Like I said.
Yeah. And, again, ladies and gentlemen, he has fun doing what he's doing and he's really good at it, but this is his work. I mean, our guy here does the work with no fuss, but he does it for the muss. Okay. And so those you don't know, that's the Utah fan base out here. So, Josh, do you want to remind everyone where they can find what you do and tell them how they might be able to expand with your expertise and possibly communicate constructively with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm active on Twitter at jfurksl, and you can catch my work at ksl.com. Pretty easy letters to remember. So, right. I'm happy to talk with anybody about anything. I am an AP top 25 voter as well. So I will talk about other teams. It doesn't just have to be Utah. I'm happy to discuss different things that way. So I'm excited. I love talking college football. I think it's great. I obsess over it. I enjoy it. So happy to do it anytime.
Excellent. Well, it's what I live and breathe, and it's never going to be taken away from me, regardless of how much it's been changing in the last couple of years. It's my passion. So again, thanks for being with us. Well, that's our Ute Man for you, the fans. Once again, this has been the CFP podcast. Don't forget to rate and review, subscribe, visit our website, cfpcollegefootball.com, if you're looking for a regular fix of CFB. Thanks again for listening. I'm Chappy, and I'm happy that you were here. Now go enjoy the day. Goodbye, everybody.